on the timeline, just by way of review, where does the book of Esther take place?
Medes and the Persians.
Yes, but where on the timeline? Well,
Be exile, or post-exile, I guess.
post-exile, right, or the return. Now, why do you think on this one I didn't call it the return?
Because she was still in Persia.
Because she didn't return. Yeah, even though some Jews had returned, she didn't. Way to the right.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, that's where this book takes place, because the people had been taken away, and some of them started to return during the post-exile. So that period is also called the return. But Esther and Mordecai did not return. They stayed over in Mesopotamia. And Babylon had been taken over by Persia. So now Persia has inherited the Babylonian Empire. They didn't really inherit it. They took it by force. And the Persians were much more lenient. The Babylonians and the Assyrians were very cruel. And the Persians, while cruel compared to most modern day standards, were permissive compared to the others. And they would allow people to worship their own gods, which doesn't seem that unusual now, but back then that was a big change. And so the Jews were very excited that they were now allowed to worship their own God. They were allowed to go back to their homeland. God planned all this, but the Persians had their own reasons for doing it. So when Assyria and Babylon would take people over, they would transport them, because when you're transported, you're just trying to get your life together. You don't have time to think about revolting. Persia let them go back, so they got the same benefits, but everybody loved them for it. So that worked out a lot better for them, not using cruelty and psychological warfare. So let's dive right into Esther. We're going to try to cover the whole book today. So Queen Vashti deposed, chapter 1. I tried to cut out verses so we get to the bare bones of the story, but it's already so tightly written. Every sentence is important. This is one of the greatest literary masterpieces of all time. So it was really hard to do that, but we'll see how it goes. Natalie, could you read that section there under chapter 1, Vashti deposed?
Okay. Xerxes, who ruled over 127 provinces stretching from India to Kush, he gave a banquet for all his nobles and officials. He displayed the vast wealth of his kingdom and the splendor and glory of his majesty. The royal wine was abundant, in keeping with the king's liberality. Queen Vashti also gave a banquet for the women in the royal palace of King Xerxes. On the seventh day, when King Xerxes was in high spirits from wine, he commanded the 7 eunuchs who served him to bring before him Queen Vashti, wearing her royal crown, in order to display her beauty to the people and nobles, for she was lovely to look at. But when the attendants delivered the king's command, Queen Vashti refused to come. Then the king became furious and burned with anger.
So what do we learn about Xerxes, or Ahasuerus in some versions?
And he's a king.
He's the king. Good. What else? About he's a misogynist. Okay.
He had a drinking problem.
Okay. Yes, he likes to drink.
He ruled over 127 provinces.
Very powerful king. Essentially the whole world, from India to southern Africa.
Very rich.
Super rich. Very good.
He followed the laws very strictly.
He followed the laws very strictly. Where do you see that?
Well, because he listened to the 7 eunuchs, who then they told him Queen Vashti,
Well,
and he did what they said.
well, let's look at the verse. He on the 7th day, when Xerxes was in high spirits from wine,
In other words, he was drunk.
He commanded the 7 eunuchs who served him, bring before me Queen Vashti. So it doesn't sound like he's listening to them there.
Okay.
No, he's telling her.
I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just saying in these verses it doesn't say anything about that. Okay, so Kathy, what were you saying about a misogynist?
Well, I mean, he was into his wife's beauty. It didn't talk about her brains.
Okay.
Yeah, but that's where the Lord is.
He.
She should have listened.
Okay. All right.
His wife was so smart. I'm gonna have her come over.
She should have
So he is interested in women's looks more than other aspects of their personality. That's very good. So we could.
Angry if she didn't obey.
Okay, good. The anger. So he's got a temper. Why do you think he got so angry here?
Maybe he was embarrassed that she could do it.
Okay, very good.
Yeah, he's got all these buddies there, they've been drinking, having a banquet, and the queen refuses his command.
Good. So that's an ego. It's a wounded ego thing. Good. Yeah. And along with ego, we could say he's a show-off. Think about he displayed the vast wealth of his kingdom and the splendor and glory of his majesty, right?
And I'm sure she knew what the consequences were if she didn't show up.
Well, that is a very interesting question. That's one of the probably 10 big questions of this book. Why didn't she come? And unfortunately, we don't have time to get into all the reasons. But let me say this. In books like this, in narrative in the Bible, don't assume you know the purpose of each little story. That has caused tons of problems in teaching the Bible because people are looking for a little moral to each story, like Aesop's fables, right? So they'll read a story like the flood and say, the moral of the story is don't make God mad because he might destroy the whole world. Or something. And typically what people do is they say, the moral of the story is, and they say something connected to the story, but they're really getting it from the New Testament epistles. And as long as it lines up with things like kindness and love and turn the other cheek and anything from the New Testament, then they feel safe saying that's the moral of this Old Testament story. But they might be wrong. Because these stories were written not to be read 5 times and then say, now I know what it means. It was meant to be read over the course of your life and ponder it while you spend 10 hours a day weaving or making pottery or plowing. People had much longer attention spans because they had much more time to mull something over. In our world of constant stimulation from road signs and billboards and TV and all these different things, while we're driving down the road processing tons of information we're hearing on the radio, and it was a lot different. It was a lifetime of, why didn't she come? And could it be this? Could it be that? Could it be that? And so what you're supposed to do is say, if this is the reason she didn't come, how does that affect the whole story? And then if this is the reason, how does that affect the whole story? And then as you go, slowly over the course of much time, you start to find answers to these things. Thank you, Kathy. All right. So he's a show-off. He has a temper. He has an ego. He likes to drink. He likes feminine beauty.
Is it wrong to think then, after what you just said, is it wrong to think that the reason why she didn't come was because she was holding a banquet for all the ladies?
That's a possibility. What would be wrong is to assume I have the answer now. So, okay, maybe she was just busy and she thought, maybe she believed in segregation, she shouldn't be at the men's banquet. Maybe he wanted her to come naked because it only says wearing her crown. I'm serious. That's, of the 2 big interpretations, that's one of them. It's one of the 2 main ones. But either way, his goal is to show off her beauty, but her beauty is supposed to be only for her husband. It's not supposed to be for other drunken men. Well, drunken or sober, either way. Okay, so the next section, we're going to learn more about this guy. Deborah Prairie, could you read that next section?
Since it was customary for the king to consult experts in matters of law and justice, he spoke with the wise men who understood the times. According to law, what must be done to Queen Vashti, he asked. She has not obeyed the command of King Xerxes, but the eunuchs have taken to her. Then Mordecai replied in the presence of the king and the nobles, if it pleases the king, let him issue a royal decree that Vashti is never again to enter the presence of King Xerxes. And also, let the king give her royal position to someone else who is better than she. Then, when the king's edict is proclaimed throughout all his vast realm, all the women will respect their husbands from the least to the greatest. The king and his nobles were pleased with this advice, so the king did as Mordecai proposed.
Yeah, good enough. No one knows the right. No one knows the right way, so it doesn't matter. Good. Okay, so what do we learn about Xerxes here?
He was in charge.
Okay, he's in charge. He's very commanding.
But he listens to advice.
Right, he uses his advisors. Yes, very good. He uses some of his power to solve his marriage problems. I've never been in a position of political authority, but if I were, I don't know that would solve my marriage problems. But that's how he deals with it.
Yeah, and he listened to them and did what they suggested.
He listened to, his advisor. Very good. That's very important. Okay.
And he made a statement in doing so with all the women respecting their husbands.
Good. Yeah. What were you going to say, Paul?
No, I was just saying he's taking his marital advice from a eunuch.
Well, yes. Well, first of all, does everyone raise your hand if you know what a eunuch is? Okay. A eunuch is a man that has been castrated. So surgically, with no anesthetic, had his testicles cut off. So, but the eunuchs were the ones who were sent to bring the wife. The advisors are not eunuchs.
Oh, okay.
So you can understand why the king sends a eunuch into his harem, because he has all these beautiful women, and he doesn't want anyone who might potentially be a rival. Right. So that's the king would use eunuchs for that, and that's very historically documented. The amount of boys he would bring, basically abduct, castrate, and then they would serve in his palace for his harem.
I do have a question in this section. Did he divorce Vashti?
Well, nothing has happened yet. That's the advice, and he likes that, so he's going to do it. But yeah, that's what's going to happen, essentially. So, and the plan is this way, when everyone's like, oh my word, if he lets it go, they're thinking, oh, women are going to be like, oh, the queen disobeyed the king, and nothing happened, so I can disobey my husband. And so all the advisors are worried about this. And so they say, well, here's what we can do. We can just make a law, and that'll take care of it. Not sure how this law is going to be enforced, but we'll come to that later. Chapter 2. Marcia, could you read that little section there?
Later, when King Xerxes' fury had subsided, he remembered Vashti and what she had done and what he had decreed about her. Then the king's personal attendants proposed, let a search be made for beautiful young virgins for the king. Let the king appoint commissioners in every province of his realm to bring all these beautiful young women into the harem at the citadel of Susa. Let them be placed under the care of Hegel, the king's eunuch, who is in charge of the woman, and let beauty treatments be given to them. Then let the young woman who pleases the king be queen instead of Vashti. This advice appealed to the king, and he followed it.
Sounds like a good idea. So how many provinces does he have? 127, and he's going to have one or more commissioners in each province to carry this out. So the minimum amount of women brought, virgins, young, very young women, the minimum would be what? 127. Now, if he's taking all the most beautiful women from each province, then this could be 1,000 women.
So at this point, he's divorced.
Yeah, he's gonna, yes. I mean, I don't know that how, if there was any kind of documentation, but yeah, she's basically banished, and he's gonna find a new queen.
So Esther's not living there with him anymore in the palace.
Well, she didn't live with him, but yeah, she's banished in some way. She's not the queen anymore. How that goes, was she put in a dungeon? Was she just said, you have to go live in another city? You have to go back to your parents? It doesn't.
Yeah, I couldn't figure that out.
Yeah, that's not. If the author wanted you to know exactly how the banishment worked, he would have explained that. But the point is, he gets rid of her, and he's going to pick a new one. So, what do we learn about him and what kind of person he is?
He likes the young ones.
Okay. Yes. He'll go to any means to.
Vindicate himself. And,
Oh.
it must cost a lot of money to keep these women for a year and give them all these treatments.
He was. Yeah. The money that would cost was.
The resources he was willing to use to.
Yeah, but he's unbelievably wealthy. There's records of when the Greeks finally took over and the treasuries, the amount of money they found in the treasury. It's recorded in a few different historical books, like one of Alexander the Great's secretaries was recording all the money they found. It was astronomical. It was like unthinkable how much money he had. Yes?
He wanted his women to come to him after 12 months of beauty treatments. He wanted them to be more beautiful than what they were.
Yeah, so, yes. So he's taking, it just really underscores how much he likes women. And probably not for their personality. And again, he uses his advisors. There's a little clue to his personality in verse 1. Later, when King Xerxes' fury had subsided, he remembered Vashti and what he had done and what he had decreed about her. He can't undo a decree. What does that tell you about him?
Probably that he was saddened because he did it or made that law out of anger.
Okay, so good. So a rash decision. We might call it him a hothead, if you know what I mean. Okay? Very good. All right. Any questions so far?
Yes, what did they have to do to please the king?
Well, we're going to come to that. That's a very important.
What did they have to do to please?
What did they do to please the king? When I learned this in Sunday school, it was just a beauty pageant. We'll see what kind of pageant it was shortly. Ms. Ritecki,
Yes,
could you read the next section for us?
which one now? There was.
Yes.
Okay. Now there was in the citadel of Susa a Jew of the tribe of Benjamin named Mordecai, son of Jair, the son of Shimel, and the son of Kish, who had been carried into exile from Jerusalem by Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon. Mordecai had a cousin named Hadassah, whom he had brought up because she had neither father nor mother. This young woman, who was also known as Esther, had a lovely figure and was beautiful. Mordecai had taken her as his own daughter when her father and mother died. When the king's order and edict had been proclaimed, many young women were brought to the citadel of Susa and put under the care of Haggai. Esther also was taken to the king's palace and entrusted to Haggai, who had charge of the harem. She pleased him and won his favor immediately. He provided her with her beauty treatments and special food. Esther had not revealed her nationality and family background because Mordecai had forbidden her to do so. Every day he walked back and forth near the courtyard of the harem to find out how Esther was and what was happening to her.
Okay. So can someone sum up that section briefly?
Well, Mordecai wanted his niece, or whatever she was then, to
Become queen.
try to become the queen. And I'm sure he had a
Well,
reason for that.
Okay, let's look at what it exactly says. So we can start to see the plot develop a tiny bit. There's also happens to be a Jew of the tribe of Benjamin, Mordecai, with his adopted daughter, who's like a cousin or niece. So he has this cousin named Hadassah, verse 7. Okay, she's very beautiful. Mordecai had taken her as a daughter. Verse 8, when the king's order was proclaimed, many were brought. Esther also was taken to the king's palace. It doesn't,
So it doesn't say that he gave her to.
it doesn't say that he gave her. Now,
She was taken. I didn't catch that.
if I had a daughter and I knew she was going to be one of 500 concubines for the king's pleasure and pride, or whatever, if it were optional, I'd say no. She's going to stay in our town that we've lived in all my life, and she's going to marry the young man that she's been promised to. We arranged for that. They're close family friends. She's a good, hardworking farmer. That's the life she's going to have. So it seems that this is not optional, that all of these women are just taken. And certainly all the young boys that are taken to be castrated to care for all these women, that's not optional either. No one wants his son for that. Is that
Something beeping.
something beeping?
Yeah, I heard it.
Do we know where that's coming from? Okay, well, that took care of it. Okay, so now historically, we know there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of eunuchs working for the king in this capital city. You can read Herodotus' history book if you are interested. Okay, so now Mordecai, his daughter's taken. He's walking back and forth in the courtyard of the harem to find out how she's doing every day. Okay, now one last section, Natalie. Verse 12.
Before a young woman's turn came to go into King Xerxes, she had to complete 12 months of beauty treatments prescribed for the women, 6 months with oil and myrrh, and 6 with perfumes and cosmetics. And this is how she would go to the king. Anything she wanted was given her to take with her from the harem to the king's palace. In the evening she would go there, and in the morning return to another part of the harem to the care of Xerxes, the king's eunuch, who was in charge of the concubines. She would not return to the king unless he was pleased with her and summoned her by name.
So just so you're aware, all the young women who are brought, hundreds and hundreds probably, are under Haggai. Okay, then they go to be with the king, and after that they're brought into under this Xerxes whatever guy. Okay, so while they're still virgins, they're in this part of the palace under this eunuch control, and he's arranging things for them and all their treatments. Then they go to be with the king one night. Then they go to be part of the official harem of concubines.
Okay, can I ask, what does it mean they go to be with the king? Does that mean he takes them and has sex with them?
Yes, it does.
So he did that to us?
So he said, did
Yes.
to every
Yes.
one of the virgins?
Yes.
That's a
So,
lot.
yes.
But he
So,
was tired at the end of the day.
So look what it says in verse 14. In the evening she would go there, and in the morning she would return to another part of the harem. So yes, every night he would have a new young woman and have sex with her. And then she would go to this other part of the palace. This was a huge palace. And she would not return to the king unless he was summoned by name. Now, I mean, at minimum a couple hundred young ladies. Now, at the end of, let's say it's 200. That's a low estimate. At the end of, what would that be, 9 months? At the end of 9 months, does he remember every girl's name?
I don't know how he could.
How could he? Which means that many, many of these young ladies would have sex once in their life and probably not get pregnant. And that was it. And for many of them, being so young, the first time was not great. And that was it. And they were taken from their families to a faraway land. They have sex once with a king who likes to drink, doesn't seem to treat women like people, like human beings, treats them like objects for his pleasure. And that's it. And then they're confined to, they can't leave the palace. He's very jealous. This is recorded in the Bible, how jealous he is of his harem, which is a symbol of status and pride. And no one can come near him except a eunuch. So they live for the rest of their lives in a palace with a bunch of other women who've been treated this way and some eunuchs as attendants.
She has a question.
I know.
Okay.
I wanted to finish this. So I just want you to think about how these women are treated. Now, there are a few that the king perhaps remembers. Esther is one of them. But that's what's going on here.
Is that the process that Vashti had to go through?
It doesn't say.
Yeah,
It doesn't say.
but she didn't live in the palace, they did?
She lived in the palace. It's a huge palace, and there's different quarters. Even Solomon had a wing of his palace for his concubines, because Solomon had 700 concubines and 300 wives. So a wife was a higher status, actually something like a queen. So
So he
what?
found all those young girls and just threw them out?
Well, threw them in. It was luxurious. Every need they had was taken care of, except her social and personal feelings needs.
So they could never marry or?
They could never marry. They could probably 90% of them never had a baby, and that was
They had to submit to them, whether they liked it or not.
whether they liked it or not.
So they were
That's like
prostitutes.
rape.
I mean, they weren't selling sex for money. It's actually, it's a little bit, in a strange comparison, like all the young boys who are taken and castrated.
Yeah.
Both groups can never have a family, can never know the pleasure of sex, can never have that pride of having a place in society. They're just somebody in the palace. There's hundreds of them. They can never know the joys of love with a spouse, an actual spouse.
That's sad.
They can never know the joys of love of children. They can never, again, know the joys from their family because they were all taken.
Life is ruined.
So their life is ruined all for his own pleasure and pride. So this beauty pageant is really something like a sex contest. And the eunuchs, so many eunuchs. This story just keeps constantly talking about the eunuchs. It has to do with the fact that ancient Middle Eastern kings were so protective of their harem. Especially Xerxes, according to some historians from back then. They were so protective, there could be no rivals to who he was. Part of that has to do with the fact that when a new king would come and assassinate the old king and kill all his sons, he would also sleep with his harem to show who was the new boss in town. That happened to David from his own son. When his own son took over the kingdom from him and he was on the run, publicly slept with David's harem.
So the part where it says anything that she wanted was given to her to take with her to the harem,
So
it's not really given to her. She's just taking
Well,
it to.
I mean, the idea is the goal is to impress the king. So whatever she wants to wear, she's just had 12 months of beauty treatments and perfumes and taught, and so now she can do what she wants. She can take in she can wear whatever she wants to wear. She can do makeup. She's in charge this one time to impress the king.
But she couldn't leave that.
Right. Yeah, the goal would be to win this and actually be the queen and not just some no-name concubine. So that's the goal in the minds of the men. Well, the young girls, who knows what their goals were, and they were probably just scared. I'm just talking about why there's all these eunuchs around. They're very protective. And there's another reason why it's mentioned so much in this story. These eunuchs are used to compare and contrast with other characters, which we'll come to. He takes all these young people, and their life is now devoid of a lot of the things life is supposed to be filled with. All right, page 2, I think, or maybe 3. Thank you. Deborah Prairie, could you read starting in verse 15?
When the turn came for Esther, the young woman Mordecai had adopted, the daughter of his uncle Abigail, to go to the king, she asked for nothing other than what Haggai, the king's eunuch, who was in charge of the harem, suggested. And Esther won the favor of everyone who saw her. She was taken to King Xerxes in the royal residence.
Now, what does that little section tell us about Esther now?
She must have been really beautiful.
She must have been beautiful. Okay, good. Certainly true.
She's very kind, Judge.
Kind. Why kind?
Well, she took, she didn't want anything to take with her.
She listened to the eunuch.
Yeah.
She listened to the eunuch. Okay, that's an important thing because, first of all, the king's advice almost never comes from the eunuchs. This guy is the guy in charge of the king's concubines. I mean, him and this other guy. So if anyone were to know what the king would like, it doesn't say whether it's clothing or items or whatever, it would be him. So that's wise person's advice to take, someone who would know. But think about this. When there's a young 14-year-old girl who gets to do her own makeup for the first time, or have it however she wants, someone else would probably apply it. In your experience, when a young girl does this, how does she look afterwards? Overmade. Yes. Like clowns. So overdone. And they think the more makeup, the more pretty they are. But Esther doesn't do that. She's had 12 months of people doing it to her. She finally has a chance to make her own decisions about it. And she takes the advice of someone in charge. That speaks a lot about Esther's character. But we'll come back to more about Esther as we go.
I got a question in that first part.
Yes.
It says when the turn came for Esther, were they numbered or lined up or?
In some way, yeah. So it'll be one a night for a long time. Yes. So I don't know how they arranged the order, but there was some kind of order.
That must have been an awful big place to have all of those women.
It was an awfully
When
big.
he's done with them, he gets another set. I mean,
Yeah, it was a big, huge palace. I mean, the splendor. I mean, he had just had a 6-month party when all this starts. It's the splendor and extravagance and power of this king are unparalleled. Okay, now verse 17. Deborah, keep going. You're doing good.
Now the king was attracted to Esther more than to any of the other women, and she won his favor and approval more than any of the other virgins. So he set a royal crown on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. And the king gave her a great banquet, Esther's banquet, for all his nobles and officials. He proclaimed a holiday throughout the provinces and distributed gifts with royal liberality.
So, the king's finally chosen his new queen. Side note, after that, big holiday, celebrate, national holiday, the king got a new queen. He still sleeps with the rest of the girls who haven't had their turn yet, but they already know they can't win the contest.
How did he not get a disease?
Well, they were all virgins. So there would be no...
Yeah, but he's still tapping one to another.
But that, I mean,
He's the one who
That's
could
why they
see
didn't
that.
get disease.
Yeah.
he gets it, he passes it
yeah.
to the rest of them.
Well, yes, but that's it's not good. So, okay, I'm going to just sum up this section. Mordecai happens to overhear a plot to kill the king, and warns the king and saves his life. Now, we already know how the king treats people who work for him, so it's not hard to guess why people might have been mad at the king. But it doesn't say. What it just says is Mordecai happens to overhear this and warns the king, saves his life. Okay, that's just a little detail thrown in there. Now in chapter 3, the goal is to bring all this together in time. We'll see how that goes. Paul, could you start reading in chapter 3, that first paragraph?
After these events, King Xerxes honored Haman, son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, elevating him and giving him a seat of honor higher than that of all the other nobles. All the royal officials at the king's gate knelt down and paid honor to Haman, for the king had commanded this concerning him. But Mordecai would not kneel down or pay him honor.
Okay, now let's pause right there. So the honor for the king's favorite noble is commanded. Has this idea of commanding people to honor someone, has this already been brought up in this book?
I thought Vashti was supposed to honor him.
Well, she was supposed to come out and show off her beauty, but when she doesn't, he makes a law for the whole nation that what?
They have to honor him.
Every wife has to honor her husband. So,
Greatest to the least.
yes, every household. So that's the way it's going to be from the king down. So, again, the commanding of honor. There is a connection between glory, honor, and power in this book. What that connection is not yet shown. It will be shown. Okay, Paul, keep going in verse 5.
When Haman saw that Mordecai would not kneel down or pay him honor, he was enraged. Yet having learned who Mordecai's people were, he scorned the idea of killing only Mordecai. Instead, Haman looked for a way to destroy all of Mordecai's people, the Jews, throughout the whole kingdom of Xerxes.
Okay, so this book is at the very least rated R. Probably whatever higher than R is as far as rating. It's very sexual. It's very violent. This guy is so so enraged at Mordecai that he's like, I'm not just going to kill him. That wouldn't satisfy my anger enough to just kill him. By the way, the way they killed people was unpleasant. It wasn't hanging. Some of the translations say that, but they have found carvings of execution methods, which was to impale the person on a big spike. Typically, they tried to do it in a way that they wouldn't die right away. They would drive up on top of the spike for a long time. So I don't want to just do that to him. I want to do it to I want to kill his whole race.
I got a question.
Yes.
Why wasn't Mordecai been given the position of the gatekeeper for? He's the one who gave the warning, not.
Haggai is, Haman. I'm just thinking of this guy. Haman was given a position, a high position, like number 2 in the kingdom, and it doesn't say why. But your question should be, why wasn't anything done for Mordecai? There's records of this king giving great positions and honor and things for people who serve him and do things for him. And so when Mordecai learns this and then nothing's done for him, this king who will spend millions just for a party and has a record of honoring people who help him out, probably very disappointing.
Yeah, because he just saved the king's life.
Yeah. So, but it just happens to be this one little thing overlooked. He happened to hear this thing, and now he happens to have been overlooked in a reward. I wonder why. We'll see how this goes. But this, up to verse 7, 3:7, that sets the central plot of this story now. What is the central plot and conflict of this story?
The destruction of the Jews.
The destruction of the Jews. They're all going to die. Okay, so here we go. Let's see how this goes. Deborah, could you read starting in verse 10? I'm sorry, 8. Deborah Prairie. Sorry.
Okay. Then Haman said to King Xerxes, there is a certain people dispersed among the peoples in all provinces of your kingdom to keep themselves separate. Their customs are different from those of all the other people, and they do not obey the king's laws. It is not in the king's best interest to tolerate them. If it pleases the king, let a decree be issued to destroy them, and I will give 10,000 talents of silver to the king's administrators for the royal treasury. So the king took his signet ring from his finger and gave it to Haman, son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the enemy of the Jews. Keep the money, the king said to Haman, and do with the people as you please.
Okay, pause. So he takes off his signet ring and gives it to Haman. What does the signet ring do?
It seals the degree.
It's essentially the signature, the way the president will sign a law into, right? It's like that. That was a lot of these kings were illiterate, but they had a very intricately special ring that they could press into the wax, and that meant it was an official decree. And he's like, here, don't worry about the money. Do whatever you want. Haman very carefully says it would be best for the king to kill all these people. Obviously, he's spinning this. Why would it be best for the king to wipe out one race in his kingdom?
To take it off of his hands.
It's for Haman's own reasons. But anyway, he gets the king. Here's the ring. Do whatever you want. They send out that law, and then let's skip down to the last sentence of that section, Deborah.
The very last one?
Yes.
Okay. Start with dispatches? When you said 7.
That section, so halfway through 15, the king...
Okay. Dispatches were sent by couriers.
No.
Oh, just the
Very last sentence.
Okay, that's what I thought. The king and Haman sat down to drink, but the city of Susa was bewildered.
So he sends out this law. There's this one race, because this is a melting pot type situation in this empire. Lots of different races. There's this one race, they're all going to be genocide, all killed. And the city's like, oh my goodness, this has never been done before. They're just going to wipe out a race? I hope this doesn't start a new practice of occasionally wiping out races. And while that news is, people are bewildered, while that news is spreading through the city, the king and Haman have a little drinking party to celebrate, I don't know, their terrible administrative decision. Okay, so what do we learn? What kind of person is King Xerxes?
Evil.
Good.
Self-centered.
Good.
Influence.
Can we easily influence? Very good. Yeah.
I don't even know
What kind of leadership and decision making is this?
Terrible.
Wishy-washy.
Think about every decree so far has been thought up by somebody else. The decree about wives honoring their cousins, the decree about banishing Vashti and having this whole sex contest thing to get a new wife, this decree about wiping out an entire race. It goes on and on and on. We don't have time to go through the whole book like this, but every single decree the king makes, someone else thinks up for him. It's like he can't think for himself because he is completely focused on his own immediate bodily pleasures.
He's a selfish person.
Yes.
He wants what he wants when he wants.
So here's the kinds of things the king cares about: food, wine, sex. The kind of person who, when he gets mad, he gets furiously mad, so mad he can't think. That happens more than once in this book. It's already happened once. And he's like, I'm so mad, what should I do? Somebody help me. Well, I don't know what to do. Who should I kill? He's also a possessive control freak. And possibly the reason he's a control freak is because he's a show-off for his ego. And one last note we've already covered, but he's careless of other people's suffering.
Yeah, he doesn't care.
He doesn't think about that at all. It's only what will stroke his ego and satisfy his immediate pleasures. Mostly bodily pleasures, like food, alcohol, and sex.
What
And-
I don't understand is that
And rage would be one of those, a passion.
you're talking about taking a lot of people's lives. Why, you wouldn't question that? It's like, you wouldn't question why are we doing this?
It's shocking.
Yeah,
It's shocking.
Why is he not asking the question?
Yeah, I don't know, it's like he didn't even listen to what was said.
He's like, these other people, they're smart, my advisors. This is my most trusted advisor. Do whatever you want. But I want to have some wine. I haven't had any for a couple hours, so.
He doesn't think about other people.
He doesn't think about other people. Is with a partner, take out these pieces and arrange the story in order. Okay, maybe we should do this together. It seems to be more difficult than I imagined. It starts out with the banquet and showing the king's greatness.
Is that banquet one?
No. That's banquet and king's greatness.
Oh, okay. That's one.
Okay. The king's greatness, Xerxes' greatness. Then there's a contest to get a new queen, because at that first banquet there's a big problem with his wife, Vashti. So then there's the contest, and when the contest is completed and he gets a new queen, it's a holiday. Okay, so there's a holiday.
Is that the premium holiday?
No, that's the contest holiday.
Contest holiday.
Then Mordecai saves the king.
Okay.
Little note there. Then we have the rise of Haman.
Give us a minute. Thank you.
He's elevated to the highest noble of the land. Then after that, we just read about the edict to kill the Jews. We'll come to it shortly. Then, we didn't get to this in class, but if you're familiar with the story, then Esther goes to the king, which is scary because it's illegal to just waltz up to the king, even if you're the queen. And the law is if you just go into the king's throne room, you die unless he holds out the royal scepter to spare your life. So she goes to the king, and he's like, "What do you want, Esther?" And she says, "I want to give a banquet for you." So she gives Esther's first banquet. Banquet number 1. Yeah, it's just her and the king and Haman. And then Haman goes to his wife, goes home that night. And do anybody remember what he says to his wife and his attendants? He says, "I'm so great. I'm the greatest. The king and the queen and just me, the three of us, had our own banquet." And yet, on his way out, he sees Mordecai, the Jew, standing there. He's like, "But none of that gives me any pleasure because Mordecai, the Jew. I can't even enjoy my own greatness." And so his wife says, "You know what? Why don't you build a 75-foot tall impalement spike, and tomorrow you can put Mordecai on the top of it. And everybody will see for the whole city." It's got to be tall because you want everyone to see the people who cross you, look what happens to them. Not that one. He just builds it. So he just builds it here.
What one is that one?
It's just a spike. An empty spike. It just has it built that night. The next morning, this is here, the great reversal. The next morning, or early, probably 5 in the morning, he goes to the king. He's got this spike made, and he says, "I'm going to go ask the king if I can put Mordecai on this spike that I had built." But it just so happens that the king can't sleep that night. And he says, "Come read me some of those boring records of my reign." And they just happen to turn to the section where Mordecai saved the king's life. And he says, "Oh yeah, hey, what was done for him as a reward?" And they say, "Oh, we didn't do anything for him." And he's like, what can I do to reward this guy? I can't think for myself, so which of my nobles is around? And they say, "Well, actually, Haman just came in to talk to you, wanting to put Mordecai on this." And he's like, "Great, send him in. Haman, come in here. You're smart, and I can't think for myself. What should I do to somebody I want to honor?" Mordecai, who's full of his own greatness, says, "It's going to be me." He's like, "This is what you should do. You should put your robe on him and let him on your horse and lead him around the city and say, 'This guy's really great.'" And the king says, "Good idea. Do that for Mordecai the Jew." So it's a great reversal. It's it's one of the best moments in literary history. It's so rare, I will say, it's so rare in the Bible, and especially in this book, to be told someone's thoughts. This is the only time in the story where you're told someone's thoughts. So many other things, it doesn't tell their thoughts. Like why won't Mordecai bow to Haman? We don't know. That's one of the big questions. Why didn't Vashti come to the king? We don't know her thoughts. So all the other times in the book, you have to figure out the thoughts on your own, which, by the way, that's how real life is. We see people doing things, and you're thinking, what is going through their mind? And so you have to figure it out. So reading this book and pondering this book helps you figure out things about real life. It's a skill to develop. This is what this person did. What could their motives be? You weighed it. Could it be this? Could it be that? I don't want to jump to conclusions. So this book is partially teaching you how to do that. Okay, so we see that for the one time we see this guy's thoughts, and he's totally wrong. And he gets humiliated. Okay, so then look at this. The story, I was going to have you do the order and then have you, and then tell you a new way to arrange it, but we'll just do it. Then, right after that reversal, he runs back home to his wife. Okay?
So is this right after the spike?
Yeah, the spike should be next to the wife one because that's her idea. So right after the great reversal, he runs back home to his wife. And then while he's talking to his wife, he's like, oh my word, I can't believe what happened. It was so humiliating. And his wife says, you're done for. And so, but while he's still there talking to him, the eunuchs come and say, hey, it's time for the banquet. And they take him away to the banquet, so there's banquet 2. Now notice how this story lines up. Everything's happening in reverse order now. If you were to lay it out, it would come to this, the great reversal, and then everything in the whole story will happen in reverse order. At the second banquet, he says, Esther, I love these banquets with you, but I know you want something. What is it? And she says, I just want my life and the life of my people. Some guy has sold my people for destruction. He's like, who would do such a thing for my queen?
So at that point, did he know that she was a Jewess?
No.
Oh,
This is a big reveal here.
She says,
And he said, who would do such a thing? And she says, Haman. And the king's so mad and can't think for himself, he storms out in a rage. And then Haman's there, and he's like, oh, shoot. He's like, I know the king's super mad, but I also know that anybody can control the king with whatever they want. He's like, Esther, please, 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 please. He's falling down, Esther, please. And then Xerxes comes back in and sees him touching his wife. We know how the king feels about that, about somebody touching one of his wives. And he says, he'll even molest the queen in my presence while I'm right here. And some of the eunuchs come in, and he's super in a rage, and they say, I know you're mad at this guy. There happens to be a 75-foot tall spike at his house, and he built it to put Mordecai on that saved your life, king. He was like, great. That's a great plan. Every time somebody else thinks for the king, put him on it. And so now we get right here, but this time Haman's on it. That's Haman on the spike. Yeah, that's his body. His arms should be hanging down, I guess. And his mouth is open in agony. Okay, there he is. Now, Esther goes to the king again. I'm kind of getting, my boxes are a little too tall here. Esther goes to the king again. Esther to king. He extends the golden scepter again. And so what he does is, once again, he doesn't make his own edicts, but he says, here, you and your dad, uncle, whatever he is, you guys, here, take my signet ring. So he gives the signet ring to Mordecai, and they make a new edict. You can't just reverse an edict in Persia. But you can make another edict. They can't get rid of that day that the Jews are going to be killed, but the new edict says the Jews are allowed to defend themselves. So there's a new edict. And from there we get a section on the rise of Mordecai. And then we get a section where Mordecai saves the whole Jewish race. You see how everything's happening in reverse order? He saves the king. Now he saves the Jewish race. And then there's a big holiday called Purim. There's a holiday called Purim. And then there's a section on Mordecai's greatness. And that's how the book ends, talking about Mordecai's greatness. Okay, so are you seeing the arrangement and structure? Everything's getting bad, terrible king, terrible advisors, the great reversal, and then everything starts to change and go the opposite way. So that is the structure. Now let me run through very briefly. There's so much here. Let me run through this great reversal. All these reversals. This is a book full of reversals. You can fill these in if you want, but just the way the story turns on its head. Vashti breaks the law by not entering the king's presence, and Esther breaks the law by entering the king's presence. Haman starts the whole thing because a Jew won't bow to him. And he ends the whole thing by bowing to a Jew, a woman.
That was Mordecai that did that?
No, Haman. Number 2. It says it on the page 4, it says all this. That was number 2. Three, because Haman hated Mordecai so much, he had to honor him. Had he not built the spike to put him on, he wouldn't have been in the king's palace. He wouldn't have been the one to have to honor him. And because Haman wanted honor so much, he had to have people bowing to him. I can't stand if one person in the whole kingdom doesn't bow to me. Because he had to have honor so much, he was humiliated. Number 5 is a simple reversal. He builds the spike for Mordecai, but Haman's the one put on it. These are all reversals. Number 6, the all-powerful king is constantly controlled. Everybody. The advisors in chapter 1. The Haggai in chapter 2, Esther's controlling him, Haman's controlling him, Mordecai's controlling him. Everybody's always controlling the king. Number 7, the only command that he thinks of for himself in the whole book is one that's not obeyed. Bring Vashti out here. It's the only command he comes up with on his own, and it's not obeyed. And it's a really stupid one. None of the irrevocable edicts, Persia has irrevocable edicts, none of them are obeyed except Mordecai's. Think about the first edict. All men are to be masters in their own home with honor. How are you going to enforce that? In a kingdom so big, you're going to have a guard stationed 24/7 at every door, poke his head in. I heard that disrespectful tone, Mrs. whatever your name is. There's no way to enforce a law like that. Kill all the Jews? Well, that was an edict, but it didn't happen. The Jews killed others. Number 9. Haman is enraged at someone who dishonors him, so he seeks counsel. His counselors suggest a punishment. He takes their advice. His counselors are his wife and servants. Does that sound a little bit like the king in chapter 1? Enraged at someone who dishonors him, seeks counsel. His counselors suggest a punishment. He takes their advice. Haman and the king are 2 peas of the same pod. The king leads a little more towards fleshly pleasures. Haman leads a little more towards the ego side. But those are, think about 1 John. What are the things in this world? The lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. They've both got all of them. They both got all three. The king is mainly lust of the flesh with the other two, and Haman is mainly the pride of life with the other two.
Lust of the flesh.
Lust of the eyes, pride of life. It's from 1 John. There's a little difference, though. For Xerxes, the dishonorer is his wife, and his counselors are unrelated. For Haman, the dishonorer is unrelated. It says unrated, but it's supposed to say unrelated. And the counselor is his wife. Number 10, the last one. When he was bragging to his wife about how great he was in the first time, he said, "Look at how great I am. I have 10 sons." That 10 sons, that was about manliness back then. Men wanted to have sons. Mordecai had no wife, apparently. She's not mentioned. Everybody else's wife is mentioned. Wives are a huge theme here. And no kids. And he only has, adoptively, he only has one daughter. You don't fill in that blank by that. He only has one daughter, and that's not nearly as prestigious as 10 sons. If it ends with Mordecai's greatness, why not talk about his wife and sons? That's what this whole thing has been about, wives. What kind of man has no wife and no descendants? What kind of man would have access to communication with the emperor's harem? What kind of men kept on being mentioned in this book?
Rude, egotistic.
The eunuchs.
Oh, the eunuchs.
They keep coming up over and over throughout this book.
Mm-hmm.
There's very strong evidence, it doesn't say it, but that Mordecai was a eunuch. That's why he doesn't have children of his own. He only has this adopted niece. That's why he's able to communicate with her. The king would never let any man talk to any one of his wives, his harem.
So he was a Jew. How did he become a eunuch?
He was captured and taken a prisoner. In fact, there's prophecies that Jews would before the captivity, there's prophecies that they would be taken and some of them would be castrated. Isaiah and different prophets. Okay, one last thing about that. What's the significance that he's a eunuch? The very last word in this book is seed.
S-E-E-D.
About Mordecai's seed. This is a story about how a eunuch has seed. By saving the lives of the whole race, he, in a sense, becomes the father of the race. And so every Jew who lives owes their life to him, the way I owe my life to my father. And that's why it says he spoke up for the welfare, some translations say, of the Jewish race. But what it actually says is of his seed. The point is, what happens to Mordecai through all these crazy coincidences is the most unreversible thing. Castration, inability to have children, gets reversed in this story. The only thing more unreversible is death, which gets reversed at the resurrection of Jesus Christ.
So the story is what goes in the blank?
This is a story about how
A eunuch has seed. Things appear to be so random. There's dice in this story. There's all these weird coincidences. The point is that God is at work in a messed up, evil world to change it, to reverse everything.